The contents of the following program are not intended to substitute for the advice of your healthcare provider, and the producers of this series assume no liability for the use or misuse of the material presented. Creation or evolution, design or random chance. They say it all began with a Big Bang. But when we look at the amazing human body, the answer is obvious. The complexity of the design exceeds anything man has ever made. The body could only have been designed by the master designer we read about in the Bible. Divine design.
Hi, I'm Patty Barnes, Director of the Midwifery Program at Heartland College. Today, we want to talk about labor and delivery, the entering of the baby into the world. There's a reason why the Bible often uses the analogy of a woman in labor or travail. Nothing seems to come closer to explaining the pain and struggle that takes place before a tremendous blessing is experienced. The scriptures speak of the church in travail and the world itself in pain to be delivered. Jesus used this illustration to explain to his disciples that the sorrow they were about to experience at his death would be followed by great joy. In John 16:21 we read,
"A woman, when she is in travail, hath sorrow, because her hour is come. But as soon as she is delivered of the child, she remembereth no more the anguish, for joy that a man is born into the world."
Most every woman who has given birth can agree with that. The joy of holding that newborn baby completely overshadows the travail of labor. Let's look now at this process of labor and delivery, and perhaps along the way we will see some spiritual applications for the church in these last days. The first thing I want to discuss is how to determine true labor from false labor. In an earlier session, we talked about Braxton Hicks, the name given to light, painless contractions that serve the purpose of preparing the uterus for the real thing. Braxton Hicks usually begins long before the delivery, therefore contractions in themselves are not a sign of true labor. Before we go on, let's explain what contractions are. They are like a tightening sensation that begins in the lower back and spreads around to the front. Cramping will also be felt. Downward pressure is being applied on the uterus, pushing the baby downward into the birth canal. A natural hormone called oxytocin is released from the pituitary gland, which triggers these contractions. A synthetic oxytocin called pitocin has been developed in order to augment this process. But God is the designer and creator of the real thing. To determine the true labor from the false, we need to observe the timing, frequency, and the intensity of the contractions. Now, true labor contractions come at regular intervals. False labor will be irregular intervals. True labor contractions intensify and grow closer together. False labor, they will not. True labor is felt in the back and lower front, where false labor often is felt in the front and high. True labor will not cease with position change or activity. False labor will cease. True labor, warm baths or sleep will not stop them. But false labor, warm baths and sleep will stop them. True labor loses the mucus plug, which has been for 9 months served as a barrier against bacteria. But false labor does not lose the mucus plug. In true labor, the cervix softens, shortens, and dilates with effacement and dilation. For false labor, minimal cervical change. The descent of the baby or dropping into the pelvis is called lightening and usually begins 2 to 4 weeks before labor begins. However, with multips, those who had had several babies, lightning can happen right at the beginning of labor. When lightning occurs, it will bring some relief to the mother's breathing, but will once again increase pressure on the bladder. Don't be alarmed if the baby's movements slow down now at this point, but you still need to be feeling that baby. About this time, the mother gets a burst of energy, or what is called the nesting instinct. This is probably caused by the decrease in the progesterone level and an increase in epinephrine. But no one really knows for sure why the mother suddenly gets an urge to clean the entire house and cook up a storm. The drop in progesterone level will also encourage loose stools, which is just another sign that true labor is about to begin. True labor has 3 stages. The first stage of labor has 3 phases. These are called the latent or early phase, the active phase, and the transition phase. The second stage is the birth, and the third stage is the delivery of the placenta. Let's look at the latent phase of the first stage. This is the longest phase of labor, but fortunately the easiest. The contractions are generally mild and establishing a regular pattern. The cervix begins to efface, thin out, and dilate around 2 to 3 centimeters. At this point, the mother's emotions begin to be varied, ranging from excitement to apprehension. Contractions are not so intense, so she's able to communicate freely. During this time, she should be encouraged to walk, eat, and rest in preparation for the next phase, which will be more intense. Here is when we find great value in having a doula or birthing assistant. As reported in the Journal of Perinatal Education, different studies comparing outcomes of 2 groups of mothers, one with a doula assistant and one without. They found that those with doulas had significantly better birth outcomes. They had fewer C-sections, shorter labor, and were more likely to breastfeed their babies successfully. It was a continuous support and encouragement that made the difference. Next, we come to the active phase. The contractions become more intense and closer together. The cervix dilates to around 4 to 7 centimeters, and at this point, she's going to need continuous support. Slowed, controlled breathing should be encouraged, along with massage to the lower back for relief. Hydrotherapy can also be benefit, easing the discomfort by relaxing the muscles. And at this point, she will probably not want to eat, but should be encouraged to stay well hydrated. This will help her circulation and energy level during labor. There have been several studies on the benefits of walking and maintaining an upright position throughout the first stage of labor. They have concluded, based on their findings, that women of low risk tend to have less need for interventions, shorter labor, and less C-sections. It's a simple matter of allowing gravity to work in the woman's favor. In addition, it decreases the pain in the back that is only increased in a supine or flat position. We now move into the final phase of the first stage, called the transition phase. The contractions are very intense now, and the dilation is usually from 7 to 10 centimeters, which is considered completely dilated, allowing the baby's head to fit through the cervix. This is the hardest but shortest phase. Here is where the mother might feel like she just can't do it anymore. Now she needs encouragement, letting her know that it's almost over. She can do it. In addition to the dilation and intensity, the mother may also experience nausea and vomiting, alternating between sweats and chills, and the impulse to push as a baby presses against the sacrum. This now leads to the second stage of labor, the birth. This is when the mother begins pushing hard and the baby begins moving into the delivery position. As the baby is moving down into the pelvis, there are 8 movements the baby makes as it naturally navigates through the birth canal. These are called cardinal movements. The first one is engagement, when the head or the presenting part enters the pelvis. Then descent, when the baby descends through the pelvic inlet. Flexion, when the head meets resistance It flexes so that the chin touches the chest. Internal rotation. This is when the occiput, or the back of the head, rotates to face down. Extension. This is when the top of the head is delivered and the face and chin extends. Restitution. Here the head rotates 45 degrees. And external rotation. This occurs as the shoulders rotate to align with the head and the anterior shoulder is delivered. Expulsion. The posterior shoulder is delivered, followed by the remainder of the body. By the way, these movements are not made by the doctor or midwife. They are ordained of God, a part of His miraculous plan. There are various positions also for pushing, but the upright position is superior as it allows gravity to work. Squatting can be effective in increasing the opening of the birth canal by as much as 20 to 30%. In addition, the pain is somewhat less and the contractions are more effective. This can shorten the duration of the pushing. Now that the baby has been delivered, we enter into the third stage of labor, which is the delivery of the placenta. This can take anywhere from 5 to 30 minutes. Once the cord stops pulsating, we clamp and cut it. We dry the baby and wrap him in a blanket and give him to the mom to nurse. What takes place now is amazing. As a mom begins to nurse, there's a natural oxytocin release that causes uterine contractions again, which aids in expelling the placenta and reducing the uterus down to about the size of a large grapefruit. Through a process called involution, it will take about 2 weeks or so for the uterus to return to its near normal size. I say near normal, for the uterus has stretched some and will remain a little larger than its pre-pregnancy size. It will take about 6 weeks for the placenta to heal. Now let's look at some spiritual applications we can draw from this amazing process of childbirth. In 1 Thessalonians 5:2-5 we read,
For yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. For when they shall say, Peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. But ye, brethren, are not in darkness, that that day should overtake you as a thief. Ye are all the children of light, and the children of the day. We are not of the night, nor of darkness.
The Apostle Paul uses the example of a woman in labor to give us an idea of what it will be like when the return of Jesus is near. A pregnant woman knows when she is about to give birth, for there are obvious signs and severe pains that make it ever so clear that a child is soon to be born. Paul goes on in verse 6 to say,
Therefore let us not sleep as do others, but let us watch and be sober.
Just like transition is the hardest part of the birth, but the shortest, the time of trouble and the 7 last plagues will be like transition for us, the hardest, but the shortest, before the coming of the Lord. In Galatians 4:19, Paul wrote,
My little children, of whom I travail in birth again until Christ be formed in you.
With this in mind, we should also labor and travail to bring others into the truth. Join us next time for more of the divine design.